Welcome to the Advancement Podcast. Our mission is to reach the lost in America by advancing leaders and churches so that communities are transformed. Join us as we discuss how to stay healthy as leaders, work in teams, and lead change. Come on, let's advance together.
Well, welcome back to the Advancement Podcast.
Welcome back.
Our third one with Gary Reinecke. And before I introduce Gary, maybe for those of you who happen to be watching and if you just heard that, Todd's 1-year-old son is joining us at the microphone.
Yeah. Welcome to the Advancement Podcast, Jonah. He's won this week.
Jonah is looking around and holding on. He's doing what 1-year-olds do.
Yeah.
He's getting him a cinnamon roll. You know,
Oh, nice.
when you wouldn't get me a cinnamon roll.
I told you I would get you a cinnamon roll.
Just saying.
Yeah.
He was eyeballing Tim's cinnamon roll.
Gary Reinecke back with us. Gary is a great leader, and we just enjoyed having him for this series on team. Gary's an author, and he's the executive director of In Focus Ministries. He has a passion to empower leaders to start and reproduce healthy churches. I love healthy leaders and healthy churches.
We need more of them.
It's why we do what we do.
Yep.
Right on.
That's right. He's got a doctorate of ministry from Fuller Theological Seminary.
He's a doctor.
So, yeah, we kind of picked up on that in this last episode. We may drop the doctor card a whole lot more and more.
That was fun, by the way.
Yeah.
Good. It's optional to call him doctor.
Yeah.
Optional.
Oh,
Yeah.
Only when we really want to stump him, we call him doctor.
Yeah.
What's
I know.
up, Doc? He's also a master certified coach with the International Coaching Federation. And he is I saw this on his credentials, but I didn't know what it meant when he says he's a certified Harrison debriefer.
Yes.
I didn't know what that meant, but now we know.
Now we know.
Yeah.
We forgot to mention we're at Mug on the Square.
On the
Nice.
square.
Nice plug.
Back if you hear the background noise,
Yeah.
that's we're in a public place.
Which includes your son
My son.
hollering when mom's not stuffing cinnamon roll in his mouth.
She's not shoving it in his mouth fast enough.
And since we're recording in December for episodes in January, every once in a while over the speakers, Christmas music pops up.
Yeah.
Good mention.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
Hey, we got to keep Christ in Christmas, okay?
Did you see my post where I said this week? I said, what if Jesus was our reason for everything, not just the reason for our season?
Hey, listen, okay? You're stepping on my toes too much there, all right? I only want Christ in Christmas. That's it.
Oh, millennial. You're such a millennial. Having Gary on here, because Gary and I, when we met, we found out that we're basically the same age. Our wives are basically the same age. Our kids are basically the same age. We're both empty nesters.
Wow.
We're in that good stage.
You're 60.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Reel it back.
Really bad. He knows how old. He's just,
It's fun. The hair
Lord.
gets a little grayer.
My hair's getting grayer. Gary's is staying not so gray.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
And
34, we've been talking about team, and we talked about Gary. Really the quote to kind of sum up that episode is that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go longer, take a team with you.
yeah, that was good.
And last time we really talked a lot about transitions, and that idea of before you have any transition, promoting somebody, bringing them from volunteer to paid, bringing someone new because you're growing, or releasing whatever it is, that we plan, then we execute, and then he said he called it post, but truth is we're going to plan for what happens afterwards. We have to execute on the backside.
Yeah.
It's executing within the organization after that transition.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, so as we wrap this up, we've had guys asking questions. I hope we're answering some of y'all's questions that you've seen, that you guys sent in by social media. I know we are. just not directly. Sorry if I didn't mention you by name, Anthony and Brian But anyway,
Brian Hyatt.
Hyatt, yeah.
Uh,
He wanted to know this job description thing was part of his.
I sent him all my job descriptions, all of them.
I know that.
Oh, and then he made fun of me and called me Frodo again.
Oh.
He's a Vikings fan. We got to pray for him.
Todd's a Cowboys fan. We really have to pray for him.
Probably by the time this episode comes out, we'll have fired Jason Garrett. I'm
Yeah.
speaking prophetically right now.
Yeah. Just saying.
So what?
At least I hope.
Are you what football team do you pull for?
Oh, this is very apropos. I follow Liverpool Football Club.
I don't even know what to do with that.
Is that end of conversation?
Tink, drop the mic. I don't even know.
Yeah.
So you follow soccer.
Yeah.
Got it.
Your son plays soccer, Little League soccer, or
Yeah.
Pee Wee League soccer, or whatever it is.
2 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, but
And I coached. It was terrible.
Nice.
Basically, I walked up and down the sideline and yelled the whole time.
I
There you
can't
go.
imagine you doing that.
So you're qualified.
Yeah. Yeah. It's basically what I do as a pastor, too. Walk up and down the sidelines and yell a lot.
So let's pull into this team. Gary, at the end of the first episode, you talked about in your question, you talked about the responsibility of the leader developing people.
Yes.
And I think that's a huge piece. All of us have to figure that piece out. And I think when I look back at the way historically pastors have led their teams,
Yes.
they led them as task. They led them based on their task, not
Yes.
based on releasing them into ministry. And it was the old watch me and do what I tell you to do. And that was the way development happened. And if you couldn't just get it,
Yeah.
you couldn't get it.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's been a shift in the culture.
Right.
This generation is looking for something else.
Yeah.
So
We want
help
people
us
to
with
invest.
how being a leader. What are some of those what are some of those tools that you use, and maybe even what are some of the resources that you know of that you would say, hey, if you've got a team, let's work on. Here's some good things to use. How do you develop the teams?
Okay. I think at the high level, I'm going to give you an equation. Okay. Development plus delegation equals sustainability.
Ooh.
Development plus delegation equals sustainability. So as you're developing a leader, you're now going to be more confident to delegate whatever that new role is, and that'll help that ministry and you become more sustainable.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, that's really good. I like that.
So that's kind of the big picture of what we're trying to do. I think there's a lot of good resources out there to develop leaders. I have assessments that I use. They're my go-to assessments.
What are those?
Well, I use the Leadership Effectiveness Profile. And what it does, it looks at the 8 areas of a leader, and it does a real simple assessment on those 8 areas based on that person's self-perception.
Okay.
Okay. And those are available at our website. They're just downloadable PDFs. But
And
that
your
gets
website is
infocusnet.org.
infocusnet.org. Okay.
And then based on that, what I call a baseline, you understand the strengths and the weaknesses, then I have a tool called a storyboard that gives the overview of how a leader develops a team from inception all the way to completing a project and then reviewing the progress.
Jonah's still wanting to be a part of this, isn't he?
Mom's not feeding them the cinnamon roll enough.
Okay. So a storyboard of how to develop a team from inception through
Completion of a project, okay, or the end of a program, okay. And the idea here is that this serves as a one-page coaching guide for you as the leader to coach that individual according to their strengths and weaknesses and where they're at in that process.
Okay. All right.
Along with that comes a coaching guide so you can ask appropriate questions.
Okay. Very cool. Excellent. That's excellent stuff. So what's your and then you were showing us in between our recordings here, you showed us a book that one of our guys asked the question, what kind of books are they? So what you got there?
Let me just mention this one. I'm putting it up in front of the camera, but High Impact Teams Where Healthy Meets High Performance by Lance Witt. The reason why I'm mentioning this, I received this from my pastor, and he said each chapter has been readable by the staff members, and then we debrief it on a weekly basis. So each chapter is like 3 to 5 pages, and the topics are super practical and relevant.
That's what you just said sparked something in my mind, because you talked about readability. In the last episode, we talked about the fact that sometimes we have volunteers, we have stipend, we have part-time, we have full-time.
Yes.
And balancing reading and development in a team that's in a I'm gonna call a blended team.
Right.
Is a little bit of a trick.
It's a trick.
So how do you manage that component of developing a blended team?
Yeah.
And in the scenario that I'm thinking of right now, I think they invite the part-time or even volunteer staff that would be appropriate to invite to their staff meetings for a portion of the meeting.
Okay.
So I think the principle here is invite when it's appropriate and involve them as much as possible.
Okay.
And then when there's conversations that really don't impact them directly, then I think those need to happen either after that meeting or in a separate setting. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Invite when appropriate, involve when you used a great word there. You said invite when appropriate, involve when
as able, I think.
Okay.
As able.
Okay.
Now I'm going to pivot. That's like a staff meeting, but then I think there's this other place, and you've heard the term leadership community, right?
Right. Yeah. Like a learning community.
Like a learning community. This is a little bit different because it's just for the leaders in the church. Way back in the early development of this idea, it was aspired to have this leadership community meet on a monthly basis. So you bring everybody who's involved in leadership, paid and non-paid staff, into this monthly meeting. That might be a little bit tricky today, but if you could do that on a regular basis, a quarterly basis, or even a every other month basis, what you do is you do vision huddle skills. Remember VHS vision, you share vision huddle, you work through strategic areas related to that ministry, and then you do skill development in specific skill areas. And you do that all with a time of worship and a meal embedded in it.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
I like that.
You like that?
Yeah. So, Gary, you mentioned staff meetings.
Yes.
In my staff, I have stipend, part-time, and full-time.
And volunteer, don't you?
Not in staff anymore. Everybody that's on there is either stipend, part-time, or full-time. And recently I had something happen. I'd had some people show up late to the meeting. So at the end of the meeting, I kind of went, guys, I need to start on time.
Yeah.
And I only have this hour with you a week, and I need to start on time.
Right.
And then, one of my staff members cautioned me later, and they were concerned that I maybe was a bit too harsh, which, me harsh. Can I ever be harsh?
No.
Yeah.
I mean,
drive them, run that thing hard.
Such a lovable guy. I don't know.
I get
so
that.
how do I, I don't know, demand is probably a bad word. I'm so gentle, but how do I demand to start on time?
Yeah.
But still am loving and sympathetic to those that have to have other jobs.
Yeah, one of our guys on social media actually asked that question too. He asked how to lead a staff when some at the church work all day and others work somewhere else.
Yeah, and that's where my tension comes in.
And I think that's a question that's a great thing for us to talk about, because they're out of the thousands of churches in America. That's probably a question that almost every pastor can relate to.
Yeah. Have you ever had a conversation around agreements with your team or team norms, Todd?
Not yet.
Okay.
I feel like I'm going to.
Did you notice that? Not yet.
But I feel like that's where I'm headed.
Okay. This is what I've done in settings like that. So I'll have a conversation. What's important to you as you're a part of this community or a part of this staff that we can agree to together? They're like non-negotiables.
Oh, I got you.
And you can go through a real simple exercise, get all those up on a white piece of paper, and then you have people vote.
Yeah.
Okay. And I usually will give like 3 dots, and each person puts a dot by the thing that's important to them. And the top 3 to 5 that come out are what I call your team norms. You can call them values or non-negotiables. But as soon as you come up with an agreement like that as a community, then you've got 2 levels of accountability. You have the internal accountability that the person brings, but now you have the peer pressure, the team pressure of that person when they walk into the room late.
Right.
Isn't that what I think you just described is what we used to call rules of engagement for our team.
Rules of engagement. That's another good one.
Yeah. I mean, that's essentially what you're talking about.
Yeah,
well, and don't get me wrong. I mean, if any of my staff are listening, I wasn't real bothered by it, but you know, sometimes we got a lot to do in these meetings, and they really want me to end on time. And so, because we've got Wednesday night church right after it. And so I was kind of make the point, like, if you want me to end on time, then I need all the time I can get.
Yes.
So if you want me to be respectful of you, I need you to be respectful of this time. Yeah.
That kind of goes back to part of what we talked about in the last episode about that accountability piece. Is, you know, you may, if you're a part-time, you don't work in the church all the time, you're still accountable for the things that you commit to the things that are on your ministry or your job description. And if this is one of them, then I can still hold you accountable for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So that's good. That helps us. And I know that's a problem. Here's the difficulty in our churches is, I think, number one, many of our pastors, we actually struggle holding people accountable. It doesn't feel like grace.
Yeah. Can I address that?
Absolutely. Please address that.
In that conversation about the team norms, then talk about consequences.
Ooh. Oh, okay.
So what's a reasonable consequence that we all agree to? And I don't know any examples. You can come up with one. What's a reasonable consequence that we can agree to if a person comes in late?
Yeah. Well, in the business world, that's where I've seen the swear jar.
Yeah.
You know, if you have to, and I've seen that actually in churches. If you know, in church staff meetings, for every minute you're late, you have to do, you know, it costs you 25 cents or something like that. There are things that there was some kind of consequence.
Sure.
Yes.
So that's really a good.
But for some of our stipend staff, that money may go away real quick.
You're taking your own stipend. Well,
but I didn't make a paycheck, Pastor.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be monetary. That's just an example.
Right.
I'm just here for the little guy. Okay.
Yeah.
Because you are the little guy.
Yeah. I'll kill you.
Here we go.
That was for Brian.
Yeah.
That was for Brian. Frodo's
they make
in the
fun
house.
of me because I'm 5'8".
Oh, okay.
Fine.
And he's the tallest person in his family.
Yes.
Okay.
My wife is
They really are
4'11".
hobbits.
TMI.
Yeah. My sister-in-law once told me when we were dating, she was like, "Oh, you're going to have a family of Oompa Loompas."
Oh.
And I looked at her and I said, "Yeah, we may be Oompa Loompas, but you can't have any of our chocolate.
So now when I think about development, there's a couple pieces that I think are also important for us to talk about here, Gary. I don't know if you've experienced this, but I get calls from guys who are on staff, and they say, I feel like the Lord's speaking to me, and it's time for me to move into senior pastoring, or I want to plant a church. I want to do this thing, but don't tell my pastor.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know that when you open, you talked about the fact that team is part of the DNA of the church that goes back to the New Testament, and it's about releasing, it's about empowering.
Right.
But the tendency, I think, within so many of our pastors is to develop somebody to stay with me,
Right.
not to go somewhere else.
Right.
So I think there's two sides of this. Help us if you're the team member and you're saying, I need to be able to communicate to, I don't want to hide things from my pastor and then walk in and say, I got another job.
Okay.
And then at the same time, help pastors realize that God didn't send these people to you to keep, but to prepare for their next step.
Okay. Okay. So for the staff person who feels called to move on and maybe start a new ministry, start a new church, how do you communicate that to your pastor? That's your first question, right?
Sure.
And then the second one is, how does a pastor have the mindset or acquire the mindset to release?
Kingdom mindset.
Yeah, the kingdom. Yeah. It's really a kingdom mindset. It is.
You wanted to say it. I just said it.
I know. Thank you for being inside my head.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead, Gary.
Scary.
Yeah,
place.
I think for the person who senses that call, and I have a recent experience where that happened, and it is happening. So first of all is I want to make sure that person feels like this is what they believe God's calling them to, first and foremost, because here's what can happen. If you communicate that prematurely in a way that isn't received well, you could be without a job real quick. I'm just thinking pragmatically. Okay.
It's a reality. That's
right.
Yeah.
So let's first discern if this is really what God has called you to. And then let's talk about, once that's confirmed, let's talk about a communication process with your lead pastor that is done very intentionally so that he or she can receive what's being said.
Yeah.
Okay. In other words, you don't just spring up, to the senior leader and say, hey, I'm thinking about planting a church. What do you think? That's not the way to do that, right?
Well, why not?
Yeah.
Listen, I hate you, but I got to get out of here.
Yeah. So confirm calling and then plan out how it's communicated. I think that is the best advice I can come up with on that issue.
And it sounds to me like get some outside voices to help you process how you're going to say it.
Absolutely. I mean, have you spoken to your spouse about that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
It's so funny how many times have I had to tell people, these guys or even women, they'll come to me and they'll say, well, God's saying this. I said, so what's your wife or your husband think? Well, I haven't talked to him about it. Well, maybe you should.
Right.
My wife usually softens me quite a bit. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I can't believe that.
I'll have her read letters or text messages and be like, hey, can you make that a little nicer?
Yeah.
Rachel's the same with me. I got told yesterday, you married up, boy.
I did, very much so.
About myself, not about you.
Oh, I did marry up.
But you did too.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Gary did too. I met his wife.
Yeah. I outkicked my coverage.
I always say what's good and right in my life is due to the Lord and my wife. I just wanted to go off.
Put that on Twitter. That's good.
Yeah. Okay, so now for that pastor who, I think the phrase is, pastors feel like when somebody wants to leave that they're being disloyal to them.
Yeah. Okay, two things. One is I tend to work with pastors who've already made it over that hurdle. Okay. Because that's why they would want to work with me. I have a vision to reproduce leaders and congregations. Can you help me do that? Here's a really good example of that in a best case scenario. So the church we go to, we started a venue about 5 years ago, and we started a new church about 2 years ago. And all they did was bless. Okay.
Right.
So that's what we want to end up with, right? For the pastor or lead who's not getting the vision for reproducing beyond their walls, they've got to go through a kind of a learning curve, okay? And either, someone like you, Tim, or someone who they trust needs to provide some resources to help them catch that vision. So there's a lot of resources out there. The Exponential Conference is a good way to kind of expose people to the area of church multiplication. But then there's books that you could introduce by Tim Keller. Tim Keller is a very respected leader across the board that most pastors, church planters would listen to. And then you've got other resources that you can draw from. But you've got to help them through that paradigm shift. I don't think you can just expect a leader who's resistant or is unaware to become a reproducing leader.
So what do you tell the guy that has a resistant leader that feels called to plant a church? How do they talk to that leader? How do they address it in a way that's not going to make them lose their job instantly?
Yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate. I see guys, I've helped guys get into a plant, get into a pastorate, become pastors of a existing church that's in transition.
Yeah.
And it's, they've felt compelled to keep it secret for 6, 8 months, 12 months while they're doing all this groundwork.
Right.
Because if I tell if word gets out to my pastor, he'll fire me.
Right.
And
that's a reality.
It is a reality, and it's a sad reality.
Right.
And I think, with the people that are listening to it, that predominantly listen to our podcast, we've got some of those pastors.
Sure.
There's probably a lot more of those guys that feel that are more likely to be in the place where I feel like it's time for me to leave. How do I address this going up? And so you talked about the intentional process,
right?
Getting an outside voice,
right?
Are there any practical things that they can do maybe to prepare their pastor for the kingdom piece? Maybe that's the piece.
Yeah. I think what wins the day, and some leaders are just not going to be able to accept this, right?
Right. Yeah, okay. That's true.
But what wins the day is relationship. Okay. And trust building. So however the leader can do that, I already mentioned resources to kind of expose a lead pastor to, but I think the relationship that you invest in with that lead will pay dividends later. So I would encourage, if this is the direction a staff member feels that they're going to go, getting face-to-face with the pastor and inviting spouses into that conversation sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
And being a part of a conversation that's going to take not 2 or 3 weeks. It's probably going to take weeks and months to come to the point where you feel like he can share what's on his heart.
Yeah. Okay, that's really good. I think probably my big takeaway from that is the pace, because usually we'll hold it too close too long.
Right.
And it's not about when I release. It's about the preparation time, the pace of the preparation. I can't wait till the end to go prepare them. If I see it coming,
you're right.
It's that marathon versus the sprint we talked about in the first episode of this series.
Right.
Yeah.
And think of it as a change process.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, how do you manage change? Well, just put it more on a micro level in how you communicate this with your boss.
Wow, that's so good. Well, Gary, we're to the end of our time. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Gary.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you, Tim and Todd.
We could have done 15 episodes.
We could. We'll have to have Gary back in to do some more stuff on this. What we need to do is do something just for church planting.
Yeah.
And we've got to get 2 or 3 guys like Gary on and just do a church planting strategic roundtable and do some things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I love church planting.
Yeah, I love them. Love them. Love them. So, Todd, what's your takeaway from this today?
I love what Gary said about strategic and being strategic with your relationships, that a lot of the conversations you can have are a whole lot easier when you have those strategic relationships. That's kind of something I'm dealing with in my personal life right now. Is things get easier when you have relationships with people, and people are more willing to do things for you and walk through the fire with you if you've invested in that relationship with them. And that's a big thing for me.
You know, I think sometimes in ministry leadership, we underestimate the power of relationship.
Yeah.
Yes. Agreed.
Well, Gary, everybody, if you're listening, once again, Gary is, you can find him on infocusnet.org. His email will be in the show notes. And Gary, it's just a privilege to have you with us. Dr. Gary Reinecke. All right. Till next time. Thanks, Gary, and thanks, Todd. We'll see
Great to be here.
Everybody else on the next episode of the Advancement Podcast.
Blessings. Thanks, Tim. Thanks,
Thank
Todd.
you, guys. Bye.
If you would like to keep this content coming, all Tim and Todd ask is $1 per show. See how to give, maybe even sponsor an episode or series on the website advancement.cc. Until next week, continue to advance the mission of Jesus.